Come back. So now we want to draw an ogive. An ogive is a graph that displays cumulative frequencies. So how do we make an ogive? Make a frequency table showing class boundaries and cumulative frequencies. For each class, make a dot over the upper class boundary at the height of the cumulative class frequency. The coordinates of the dots are upper class boundary and cumulative class frequency. Connect these dots with line segments. By convention, an ogive begins on the horizontal axis at the lower class boundary of the first class. Okay, so for example, here is an ogive. These are class boundaries. You see, you start from 0, that is height 0, and then you start adding class cumulative frequency in this fashion. Okay, so these are the cumulative frequencies. Let's look at their table. Okay, let's copy and paste. Start on a new page. So there you go. So these are your class boundaries. You have your frequency, and now you're adding the cumulative frequency, right? Adding every frequency to get the new cumulative frequency. So once you have that, let's look at the picture and compare it with the table. These are the class boundaries, right? These are the frequencies which do not show up really. It's a cumulative frequencies which show up. So for the first class boundary, you start at 0 height. You take the upper class boundary. For that, give it the cumulative frequency. Upper class boundary gets cumulative frequency. Upper class boundary gets its frequency, cumulative frequency. So this class boundary, upper class boundary, gets this frequency, and so on. And then you join these dots using line segments. That's an ogive. All right. So looking at the ogive, estimate the total number of days with a high temperature lower than or equal to 40. Well, 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The red lines on the ogives, we see that 117 days. So what happens at 40? So 40 lives here. I'm looking at 40.5. So 117 days, that's the y coordinate, if you like, using cumulative frequency. 40 lives here. 117 is the number you get. So that tells me 117 days have had high temperatures of no more than 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so these are various ways of displaying data. So to summarize, let's begin. Suppose you are given a bunch of data. You want to divide them into classes. Typically you go from 5 to 15 classes. So suppose they tell you to use 6 classes. Take the largest minus smallest, divide by the desired number of classes. Whatever number you get, if it's decimal, round it up to the next whole number. That is your class width. Once you have class width, you're ready to build frequency table. Write your first lowest number, the lowest data value first, and add your class width 6 times. Why 6 times? Because you wanted 6 classes. So you keep adding 8 6 times. Once you have found all the lower class limits, the upper class limits are 1 less. 9 minus 1, that's 8 there. 17 minus 1, that's 16 there, so on. Another way, first find the first upper class limit, 1 less, and then 8 more. Keep adding 8. Those get you all the upper class limits. Now, what are class boundaries? Take 0.5 to the left and 0.5 to the right for each class. These are your class boundaries. Then use the tallying approach to count frequency of your data in each class. Once you have frequency, find class midpoint. How do you find class midpoint? Lower boundary plus upper boundary over 2. Once you find the first class boundary, you're simply adding 8, which is the class width. This is your frequency table. Take your frequency and divide by the total number of data values. That gives you relative frequencies. Frequency divided by total data value. Use these two, frequency and relative frequency, to graph them. So for each class, you are going to use the class boundary and the y coordinate is the frequency. So you draw such rectangles. Remember, the rectangles touch each other. That's your frequency diagram. For relative frequency, the y coordinate is relative frequency. That's all. Notice the shapes have to be quite similar. There are different kinds of frequency diagrams. Some are mound shaped, some are uniform or rectangular, some are skewed left or skewed right, some are bimodal. Cumulative frequency. Look at your frequency table. Add the previous accumulated frequency to get the new one. So you have 23, there's nothing previously, so that remains 23. Take 43, add the previous 23, that gives you the new cumulative frequency. Take 51, add the previous cumulative frequency to get the new cumulative frequency, and so on. Cumulative frequency helps you to draw an ogive. Okay, you start at height 0, and for each class, that's where the cumulative frequency is plotted. So that completes this particular lesson, guys. Our next video will cover section 2.2. This is the end of section 2.1. Until then, bye.